With so many 5-inch motors on the market over the years, let's talk about why this motor even exists and why we even bothered making yet another 5-inch motor because there's so many that exist. So if you look at let's throw out the history of FPV motors in the 5-inch class completely. Fast forward to today, and we have motors that are all constructed mostly really, really nicely. And you have 4 sizes that are most popular. The 2207 size, the 2306 size, the now 2306.5 size, and the 2208 size. Now, 2207 was kind of the plateau that we hit, and that was a great size because it had great performance, great control, everything was great about it. And going with bigger motors tended to taper off in performance. Moving up to 2208 gave a little bit better throttle feel to it. The motor was just heavier, had more mass to it, had more abilities. It also generated more heat because it was taller rather than wider, and also had more weight, like I said, because it has more volume than a wider motor that's 1 millimeter shorter, the equivalent width to height. And so that's great, and I actually love the throttle performance of a 2208, but the trouble is that 22 size motors seem to not have quite as much stability as 23 size motors when it comes to the flight control and the way all that performs. So 2306 has become the defunct standard, whether you like the throttle performance or the throttle curve or not. I particularly am not a huge fan of the throttle curve of the 23 size motor, but it's not all that different from a 2208 for me to care enough, and I'd rather have the stability and just learn to deal with the 23 size stator. So the reason why 2306 has become popular as of recently is just because it's a different size, and now they can resell more motors because it's a little bit different. And so what that extra 0.5 does, it just gives you more volume to the stator, and it just gives you more motor in general. So really it just adds more efficiency than anything else. It also adds more power, but I think we have plenty of power in all of our 5-inch quads today, in this day and age. But of course, people are always still looking for power. So that extra 0.5 does give you a little bit more power, but for the most part, it's an efficiency thing. And there is some efficiency gains to 2306.5 over 2306. Now, this particular motor is 34.8 grams with the long wire. With short wire, you'll cut about 2 grams off that, maybe 1.8 grams or so. And so the 2306 size motors come in at 29 grams at really the minimum, and it goes up to 34 grams for a 2306. And so adding an extra gram or 2 or gram and a half, while it does matter, it's not a huge, I would be surprised if anybody can tell a gram difference on the end of the arms of the motors of their quad. Sure, it does make a difference overall, but it's really not a huge difference. If you're talking about 4 or 5 grams, yeah, that could make a really significant difference. But for the most part, if you're adding a gram of motor weight, not a gram of carbon or TPU or something of that sort, it sort of tends to make up for itself. So that's the reason why the 2306 exists. Number one, because it's the new hot popular size. Number two, because the efficiency gains are really nice, and we're going for more of a cinematic freestyle motor rather than a racing motor. However, it does work great as a racing motor as well. And number three, because it has more stability than the 22 size stator, which is unfortunate, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Anyways, looking at the rest of the motor, it is 7075 aluminum. It has a hardened steel shaft, not a titanium shaft. It has a nice patterning on the top for good prop grip. As you can tell, the motor bell is of 2 different pieces. It's not a unibody like the Cyber motor or so many other motors out there, and that's primarily to save cost, because the main reason why this motor exists is because there is no value motor out there that meets my personal requirements, and there's compromises across so many value motors out there, but I'll get to that in a second. Let's finish going over this one. It's got high temperature windings, it's got single stranded windings, it has 0.15 millimeter laminations, it has 9 millimeter Japanese bearings, it has the screw bottom retention, and it also mounts completely flat. It also has the magnet lip underneath the magnet, curved magnets, strong magnets, tight air gap, all standard stuff nowadays for high quality motors, high-end motors. The parts that are different in this motor compared to other motors that are more expensive is primarily the bell, the machining, the non-titanium shaft, and that's pretty much it. Everything else about the motor is as high quality as it gets. And that's the real kicker. So let's talk about value. So in my eyes, Super expensive motors are great and I love them, but the issue is that they're super expensive. And these are machines that we use, we crash, we bash, we don't really want to care all that much about our $30 motor when we have to replace it because we smashed it into a concrete wall. And so I have tested lots of motors, and I honestly have a very hard time telling the performance difference between a $16 motor versus a $25+ motor. And that's performance in the air, not crashing performance, not efficiency performance, not any of that other stuff. It's just actual flight performance, the feel of the quad in the air. Does it have power? Does it do what I want it to do? When you move up in the scale of quality of the motors, you start gaining durability and efficiency. Now, efficiency is obviously good, but when we're talking about mini quads, it's comical to talk about efficiency because it really only equates to 10 to 40 seconds of flight time. But it is definitely efficiency. And if you're flying cinematic stuff, you're not flying super duper fast. And so that efficiency gain is really more like 40 seconds to a minute. And so that is really nice. And you do want to have those strong magnets, curved magnets, tight air gap. But now looking at the durability of the motor. Durability is a little bit of a toss-up. It is of my opinion that if you crash any motor, the most durable motor out there, into a concrete wall, it's not going to survive. So you might as well just go with the cheaper motor and cut your losses. But in my research and assessment of motors and working with manufacturers and whatnot, I have discovered what is and is not cheap or expensive or value or not value, or where I can cut, not corners, but just cut cost off the motor and not worry that I'm compromising the motor. Now, some parts obviously do cost more and are worth it, particularly the curved magnets, tight air gap, and all that stuff. I am definitely a proponent of that stuff, and particularly the magnet thickness. A 1.7, 1.8 millimeter magnet thickness is what Ryan Harrell has actually told me is kind of the most efficient thickness of the magnets. And so this magnet is, I don't even remember the spec, I think it's 1.7 millimeter or 1.6 millimeter thick, but it has all that good stuff in it. The areas, literally, the only areas that it has cut are the steel shaft and the non-single piece bell. And so when you look at the $16, $17 motors that are on the market, they have 60, 65 aluminum. They have really poor quality bearings. Things about them are compromised to the point where you're just like, should I pay the extra $4 and get the good motor, or should I just get the cheap motor? And so they kind of don't tend to hold up as nicely in crashes, but it doesn't really matter because you're going to slam into a wall. Basically, this is why this motor exists. It is not a cheap motor to make. The margins on it are almost nothing, but it's a motor that needed to exist. And that's why we made it, because there is, at this point still, there is no $16, $17 budget motor that is in the kV range that I wanted. I keep asking them, stop making 1700 kV motors, make 1800, make 1900, make 1700 is just too low for 6S. And the reason why the kV on this is 1870 or around 1870, it's actually like 1875 or 1880. The reason that's the number it is because this motor is designed to be run on both 4S and 6S. So 6S is going to give you a lot of power. 4S, large battery capacity, is going to give you a lot of flight time and very, very fine throttle control. The quad's not going to be super fast. It's going to top out around 50 to 60 miles per hour. But if you're shooting cinematically, you're probably not going 100 miles per hour anyways. So you might as well just get the efficiency gains from having a larger capacity pack versus having a higher voltage pack. Yes, there is a difference there. Capacity does give you more flight time, and also get the added benefit of having a much easier quad to fly because it's 4S and it doesn't have a ton of power, and you have to keep your throttle all the way at the bottom and make it so touchy to make these fine movements so your throttle doesn't look all weird, because throttle is really the only thing that post-flight stabilization software can't account for. So that is really just a really long-winded way of saying that this motor is nice. We spec'd it out to the spec that we want, and it's being sold for a very nice price. And it's well worth it because there's really very little. The margins in this market are so slim. We can't offer this motor for wholesale because the margin is so slim on it. And so this motor just needed to exist for cinematic purposes, for our setup, for our roadmap for what we plan on doing in the future, we needed to have this motor exist. And it's not the end-all be-all of 5-inch cinematic motors. We do have another motor in the works that may come in a couple weeks. It's probably not going to replace this motor, but it actually might replace this motor, but it's going to be very different. It's something that really nobody has seen. And yeah, that's it. It is what it is. Take care, floss your teeth, and see you soon.